Salamat everyone. My name is Ahmed. I am Palestinian from Gaza, and I'd like to welcome you today to this exciting conversation with our guest, Professor Salman Abu Sitta. Today's session is titled Palestine from the Nakba to the Present, Resilience and Steadfastness in the Face of Ethnic Cleansing and Genocide. This webinar is hosted by Palestine Justice Movement Sydney and Free Palestine Melbourne, and endorsed by other organizations across this continent. Before I introduce our guest, Professor Salman, today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we're dialing in today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. This land was never ceded, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. We acknowledge that we're meeting today on a ground zero of a genocide that occurred more than 230 years ago, and its echoes still reverberate to our day. I am dialing in today from Camaragal country. Again, I want to welcome everyone who's joining us today, and I also extend that welcome to those who are joining us from the dark side. In particular, for those guests, I should say that all opinions expressed by myself today represent my own personal views as a Palestinian from Gaza, who happened to live on this colony and who happened to have his family enduring the past 16 months of the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And anything I say should not be construed or misconstrued as me using my authority or any authority or agency bestowed upon me as part of my workplace. I am extremely delighted today and very much honored to be in conversation with a Palestinian giant, Professor Salman Abu Sitta. Professor Salman, I don't think I can pay full tribute to Professor Salman, but I'll do my best. Professor Salman Abu Sitta is a Palestinian academic renowned for his extensive work documenting Palestine's land and people, as well as developing a practical return plan for Palestinian refugees. He founded the Palestine Land Society, accredited by the UN Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, CEIRPP, and established the Palestine Land Studies Centre at the American University of Beirut, housing over 40 years of his research. He is the author of more than 400 articles and several landmark atlases, including the Atlas of Palestine, 1948, and the Atlas of Palestine, 1871 to 1877. He has also created a series of poster maps related to Al-Nakba. His memoir, Mapping My Return, offers a personal account of Al-Nakba in southern Palestine. Dr. Salman is a former member of the Palestine National Council and has participated in numerous international forums on Palestinian rights and delivered a notable address, a Palestinian address to Balfour at the University of Edinburgh in 2022. Professor Salman, welcome to the conversation. What an honor. Thank you so much for being with us today, all the way from Kuwait.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Thank you for a long introduction. We have 76 years to talk about, and it is a lifetime of many people, including myself, who has witnessed a Nakba when I was 10 years old. It's now 28,000 days since the Nakba. We count them day by day. Every day I say I have not slept in my house. Every day I have not woken up in the morning in my house. While I know it very well, not only in memory, but in documentation. And we today see things very differently from what I saw. 1948, nobody knew about us. All the Western media was giving a false picture of a Nakba They are saying these savage Arabs, we got rid of them because they wanted to prevent the righteous, civilized few Jews to take Palestine, and those savage Arabs would prevent them from doing so. Well, the real story, of course, as we now know more than ever before, is that there were these Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe who came to our shores in smuggler ships, aided by Balfour and by the British, and now, of course, by the United States. They arrived to our shores in the middle of the night and took over our country by depopulating 530 towns and villages through an army they created of 120,000 soldiers in 9 brigades, and they carried out 31 military operations from which the people from 530 towns and villages were expelled and made into refugees today. They have done that in about 10 months, taking over 20,500 square kilometers of Palestine, which is 78% of Palestine, which now they call it, or since then, they call it Israel. So 80% of Palestine is taken over in 1948, made into Israel, and the people of this occupied land are refugees. Gaza is one example. They are also in the West Bank. They are also in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon. And in 1967, the Israelis got burdened by the support from the West. They took over the rest of Palestine, occupied West Bank and Gaza, and occupied Sinai in Egypt, occupied Golan Heights in Syria, and later southern Lebanon. And now they are discussing how much of the West Bank they are going to take, assuming that 78% of Palestine they had taken before is legitimate. And I can ask any Israeli who lives there in my country, which is Palestine, who lives in 78% of Palestine, I ask him a simple question. Do you have a title deed of the land you are sitting on? You are squatting on a land. Do you have a title deed? There is not a single Israeli today have a title deed of the land, of Palestinian land he lives on. Not a single one. You ask, how are they living there? Well, they took over our Palestine, and it is run by Israel Land Administration. And this land administration controls all the land occupied by Israel and handed it out on rental basis to the kibbutz and to various people. So every kibbutz, every Israeli settler lives in a place under a rental agreement. This is peculiar. And
absolutely. I mean, before we get to into the weeds of these things, we really want to talk extensively on this topic. But Professor Salman, after a long, brutal, you mentioned Gaza, after a long, brutal 15 months of such a barbaric genocidal campaign exacted upon the Palestinians of Gaza by the Israeli regime, we're finally at this stage of a ceasefire, albeit a seemingly kind of fragile one. You know, a lot happened over the past 16 months that it actually seems like 16 years, you know, around the region. Certainly, there's a lot to talk about today, and we want to get into the discussion, especially after what took place over the past couple of days, you know, where Trump, as the leader of the current US empire that he is, announced the blatant plan of confiscating the Gaza Strip as if it were any kind of random real estate. But before we delve into that conversation about the US administration's behavior, talking about the ceasefire, a lot has considered the ceasefire in Gaza as a victory for the Palestinians or for Hamas in particular. You know, as we watched the footage of Palestinians returning to their homes, of rubble in the northern Gaza, those scenes of crowds walking on foot, you know, it brought back vivid memories of the Palestinians' Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, where the Palestinians were expelled from their homes and cities in historic Palestine into neighboring countries and into what was then started to be referred to as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, also on foot. I mean, I've got to say those images have indeed shook and probably angered the Israeli society. You know, I've been following the Israeli media, and one Israeli journalist said, I'm quoting her now, Gazans making their way back to the north of Gaza Strip, those images make me shiver all over my body, even more so than the release of the, you know, terrorists or Palestinian prisoners. And she goes on to say, it crushes me more than anything else. And so Professor Salman, you yourself was a Nakba survivor. What do you make of all those images? I mean, how does the tragedy of the Nakba feature in the collective memory of the Palestinians? Could you help us draw the link between the past and the present? And if you could reflect on your own story as well and the history of that led to that Nakba. You mentioned you're counting the days and the nights since that day you were, you know, ethnically cleansed, really. So could you help us unpack all these historical points?
Yes, indeed. The march of Palestinians from north of Gaza Strip, from south of Gaza Strip to north, is an epic scene. I'm sure it will be immortalized in many ways. These people, in spite of great adversity, in fact, not only adversity, it was horrible genocide, bombing, starving, killing people. They demonstrated that they are determined to go home, even if that home now is rubble. This epic scene will be remembered in the history of the world and the resistance of people, their search for freedom. It is a situation which will be not only remembered by Palestinians, but by the world, the Western world, which ignored the plight of Palestinians for 76 years. The sight of these people who actually carried their little belongings with them, the child carrying a child, an old woman walking with a stick towards her home in north of Gaza. Although that home is a temporary home by itself because she herself is a refugee, yet this place is in Palestine, and Palestine is her homeland, and she would rather live and die in even a refugee camp on Palestine rather than being anywhere else. The question which comes to mind to all people is, who are these people? Who are the people in the Gaza Strip? And why do they call it the Gaza Strip? I mean, the word strip means a small sliver of land, which is about 8 by 30 or 40 kilometers wide. And it is the only place of Palestine which the Zionist militia, Haganah, in 1948, failed to capture. It is part of southern Palestine, and they failed to capture it. And they driven the people in southern Palestine into this enclave in 1948. They were driven from 247 towns and villages in southern Palestine to a place now called Gaza Strip. Their place of living is 50% of Palestine. And now they are driven into a place which is only 1.3% of Palestine. That's why they call it Gaza Strip, is the name you invented for that. So these people, all their life, for 28,000 days since then, have been trying to return home. And they are living at a density of 8,000 persons per square kilometers before October 7. Now, the density of population is 20,000 persons per square kilometer. Now, who lives in their place? Settlers in southern Palestine, their population is only 150,000 people, which is less than one single refugee camp in Gaza. And the density of population of the Israeli settlers in occupied Palestine, which is Israel, is only 7 persons per square kilometer. So the land of those refugees is still empty compared 7 persons, 7 settlers in a square kilometer in the occupied part of Palestine called Israel against 8,000, maybe 10,000, 20,000 Palestinians, owners of that land, who are now crammed into refugee camps. So the sight of these people even moving from north of Gaza Strip, south of Gaza Strip to north of Gaza Strip is an epic. It tells you piles of lessons that these people will never drop their right of return. And in October 7, the young people from these people tried to cross the barbed wires to simply go home. They are exercising a natural, a historical, a legal right to return home. The settlers in the land became the attention of the Western world and no attention given to the real original landowners who are trying to go home. I am one of them. They tell you a personal story. I am born in Al Ma'in, which is just right on the armistice line of Gaza. 2 kilometers away from this line lies a kibbutz called Nerim. It is on my land. I'm born there. And those settlers, some of them who are taken hostage, are taken from my land and to illustrate to people that we want to return home, not those settlers. So how can you? There are 4 kibbutzim in my land, Al Ma'in. Nerim, which you heard about, Nir Oz, which you heard about, Ain Hashlusha, which you heard about, and Magan, you have heard about. Each kibbutz have about 400 members, total about 1,200. They live in my land, which is 6,000 hectares, right? At a small density, as I said, 5 or 6 persons per square kilometer. Now, these 1,000 people take the land of my family, which is now extended family, is 12,000 people in refugee camps 1 kilometer away. And when one of them crosses the barbed electrified wire, which Israel established, the whole world is against it. Why are you silent for 76 years about people who were expelled and put in a prison, concentration camp, and now you are angry about so-called hostages? I am for releasing all hostages, but the real hostages are 2.3 million people on Gaza Strip for 76 years. They want to go home. Why are you silent about them? And now, because you have racist attitude, you have colonialist attitude, you wanted to glorify the people who settle on other people's land as hostages. You want to release them, which I agree to, but in the first place, you have to release 2.3 million people held under Israeli bombardment continuously for 76 years. This situation unbelievable in the world. That's why today, because of social media, our story is known in the world. In 1948, nobody knew about us. Even today, there is silence about us, except for young people in universities, for human rights organizations. The whole world knew about us. The barrier, the silence about our Nakba has been broken. Still, you have people like the Western countries which still advocate that we are to be destroyed, we are to remain refugees. They send them not only bombs, they send them bombs, they protect them from United Nations international law. They apply veto against any resolutions. So we have a case of a criminal act committed by Western countries, clearly against people whose only crime, if I call it that, they want to remain home, they want to stay home, as against people who are coming from outside to take their homes. And now there are many questions here, but I just want to say the human spirit will always prevail. The human spirit will always prevail. History told us that. And what's happening today is known to the world, but it never stopped. For example, these people, Palestinian people, who were ethnically cleansed and sent into refugee camps. What is ethnic cleansing? Ethnic cleansing means a foreign force comes and takes the land of certain people and kick them out. So when this foreign force takes over the land and the people are taken away, the job of ethnic cleansing is finished. But not for Israel, because when those expelled people live in refugee camps, they keep trying to return home. And that's why, not only now, for 76 years, Israel bombs and destroys and kills Palestinians in every camp. The word camp is anathema to Israel, not only in Gaza. You see in Jenin, for example, you say they attacked Jenin camp, they attacked Tulkarm camp. Some years back, they attacked Sabra and Shatila camp. Before that, they attacked camps in Jordan and in Yarmouk in Syria. So why do they do that? They do that because the people who claim their natural and legal right to return are still demanding that right. And hence, recently, Israel policy elevated itself from ethnic cleansing, meaning taking the land of people and throw them away, to actually genocide, to kill them completely, because they never ceased to claim their right to return home. The genocide is the last chapter of the Israeli policy of getting rid of the Palestinians. We take their land, they still demand it, they still claim for it, they do everything in their modest means to claim it. Now we have to eliminate them completely. And that's where genocide comes. Genocide is a natural extension of the Israeli ethnic cleansing. And this is, by the way, people must know, it's not accidental. It is part of the Zionist ideology from day one. From 19th century, when they said Palestine is a land without people, they knew it is false. Even the Europeans made maps and wrote many documents. The British have volumes of work. The Germans have, and the French have. So they knew that Palestine is full of its people for 4,000 years. Then why is this myth, Palestine is a land without people. It is not a myth. It's a plan to make Palestine is a land without people. Therefore, genocide is intrinsic part of the Zionist policy. But as simple people in Gaza demonstrate, they will not succeed. Israel will not succeed. There will be, and there will be a lot of bloodshed, innocent lives lost. But as long as the West continues its policies of maintaining this crime against Palestinians, two things will happen. Number one, Palestinians will not yield to that. Secondly, there will be a time of reckoning at one time at the Western Israeli crimes.
Absolutely. I mean, those footage coming from Gaza, people returning from the southern Gaza to northern Gaza, do you think they should bring us hope that it is still possible with that steadfastness and defiance and resistance that one day those, millions of people in Gaza will be able to return to their homeland at one point in time, hopefully soon?
Well, the sight of the people going from south to north, I repeat again, and I'm sure there will be a lot of world reaction to it. It's an epic. Now, let me give you a simple example. They insisted on going home to Rabin because it is home, it's part of Palestine, where from south to north, 30 kilometers. They walked 30 kilometers at the risk of being shot by Israelis, and they have done that. Now, they walked 30 kilometers from north to south. Do you know their aim and their right is to return home? If they walked another 30 kilometers north, they reach Al-Majdal and they reach Isdud. If they walk 30 kilometers from north of Gaza east, they will reach Al-Khalil in Hebron. So imagine for them, the right of return is not only right for them, it's feasible, and they could walk. They don't need airplanes and ships like the European Jewish settlers. They don't need that. They just simply walk. As I explained to you just a moment ago, I could walk 1 kilometer and find my birthplace, which my children and my grandchildren have been deprived from being born there. And the feasibility of the return to all of Palestine is very well studied by us and very well documented. And if you like, we can explain that a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, I do want to go back to the memory of the Nakba, because there's a number of propaganda in the media that really needs to be debunked. The common narrative claims that prior to the Nakba, many Palestinian landlords, living in Palestine or outside in neighboring areas of what was referred to as Levant, the Sham, under the Ottoman Empire, have actually voluntarily sold their land to, Jewish organizations and Jewish migrants. And so a certain percentage of the land of Palestine was actually acquired legally. I mean, moreover, there is this common narrative as well that, goes on to say during the Nakba, a larger percentage of the Palestinians have left their homes and villages in response to calls from neighboring Arab armies who were determined to attack and destroy the nascent state of Israel. So what do you say to all that, those claims?
Yes. Well, as I said, I lived through that as a child and after. But let me throw some ideas to you. If that is what the Israelis have in their arsenal to justify the destruction of Palestinian people, it is a stupid idea. If that's what all what they claim in order to justify killing continuously for 76 years, taking over land of Palestine, it is a stupid idea. Well, first of all, let us assume that the Israelis bought most parts of Palestine. Well, does that mean that they expel people and kill them, people who remain? Well, in London, they own 80% of the central parts of London. Does that mean they go and kill the British people and take their homes? They own huge areas of New York. Does it mean that the Americans who live there will be killed and expelled? That is just a stupid idea. But actually, it's also a false idea completely. The area of Palestine is 26,330 kilometers. Now, under the British collusion and treachery, I call it, for 30 years, the Jewish holding in Palestine is 6% of Palestine, actually 5.5% of Palestine. We have exact maps of that, and we know exactly where it is. And if you examine the land, how this land is acquired, you'll find that it is sold by Lebanese and Syrians who, in Bilad al-Sham, it was not a problem for anybody to own land anywhere. But these Lebanese landowners and Syrian landowners were told by Jewish Zionists, say, look, Palestine now is another country, you need a passport, why don't you sell us this land? So they sold this land to them. And of the 5.5%, 4.5 or 4.9 are sold by non-Palestinians to Israel. The remainder part is done under duress of British tax law introduced in 1936, which forced the Palestinians to pay so much tax to that. So the area in which the Palestinians were forced to sell to Jews is 1%. Now, let me repeat again. The area of the Jewish land is 5.5% of Palestine. They occupied, in 1948, 78% of Palestine. What justification they have to take the land, of which the difference between 78 and 5.5, let's say 72%. 72% of Israel is obtained by brute force, by killing people. They have committed 365 war crimes, of which 90 were massacres of villages. We have massacres of anywhere, Tantura, Dawaima, Bureir, Abu Shusha, and of course, Dir Yassin. Every single area they took, it was by blood of Palestinians. And the idea that that they were given orders by Arabs to leave, it's a stupid idea. It has been shot down long time ago by historians who could not find a shred of evidence of that. And supposing people felt the danger coming and their houses burning, and they left, does that prevent them from the right to return home? Well, why did the Jews in Europe came to Palestine? They said they are coming to Palestine, running away from crimes committed against them. So as you well know, in the history of England, during the Second World War, all the women and children in London have been evacuated because of the Blitz, German Blitz. But anyway, there is not a single case in which it is recorded that Arab orders were given to them to leave. And I have a diagram which is posted on our website. I show the expulsion of Palestinians from each village with time, and when there is truce, first truce in June 1948, and second truce in October 1948, when there was truce, there was no movement, no movement, no people left their homes at all. In other words, every movement, if you track it with date, you'll find it's always associated by Israeli assault and massacres in a village. When there was a lull, there was armistice, nobody left. And you can see today, 28,000 days, that in north and south go to north in the same way. So, I mean, again, let me say this. If the Israelis can come up with these excuses to justify the crime, which the history of the Jews will never be mentioned in the future without the Zionist crime in Palestine. I know a lot of Jews who are against Zionism. Now they are bold, they are courageous enough to speak up. Before they did not speak. They say, not in my name, not in my name. These crimes are continuous because the Western colonial policy find its tool in Israel. Any justification of killing people and taking their homes and making them refugees, no matter what it is never justified in any article of international law.
Absolutely. So it's a textbook definition of a settler colonial ideology that is Zionism, that it actually hijacked an entire religion to justify its doing in there. But I do want to also ask you this question about the Nakba and, you know, the right of return of the Palestinian refugees. Some say that, you know, the practical implementation of the right of return is almost impossible. You know, there are millions of Israelis live inside the state of Israel on previous Palestinian cities and villages. But I mean, there are currently facts on the ground. Bless you. Currently, there are facts on the ground. There are millions of Israelis living in previous Palestinian cities that, you know, the return of millions of Palestinian refugees will have to entail the expulsion of millions of Jewish Israeli citizens out. So what's your thought on that? Like, do we want to, you know, evacuate Israeli settlers in order to allow for the implementation of, you know, Resolution 194?
Thank you for bringing up the question, because I know it comes up by well-meaning people. They tell me in Europe, same question. But I think with all good intentions, this is a racist question. It really says that you are living in your home, a gangster coming with a machine gun and kills half of your family, throw them out, allow them to stay in a shed in the yard, and sit in your home, and people say, how can you let him, how can you ask him to leave? He is already there. And he is already there. Do you justify the crime he committed? Do you want me to stay in the shed while a stranger with a machine gun living in my home? This is a racist question, because it really implies that the rights of Palestinians are of lesser value than Ashkenazi European from Poland or Poland. This is a racist question. A crime is committed and has to be remedied. There must be a remedy for the crime. But even so, assuming that these people have no, I mean, they have not deliberately created a crime and so on, we made extensive studies and we found the following results. Even today, 88% of Israelis live only in 12% of Palestine. And the remainder of land of Palestine still empty today. We have shown this over and over and again. It's on our website, Palestine Land Society. And who then occupy 88% of Israel, which is our land? Two groups. The first group is the kibbutz. The kibbutz are planted on our land in order to prevent our return. Just like the kibbutz, as I mentioned, Nerim, 400 people against 12,000 of my family, right? They are planted in these places to prevent our return, to say every bit of land we acquired by force and by killing is now inhabited, right? And the total number of the kibbutz members who occupy refugee lands is 1 to 2% of Israeli population. And the rest of the land, 88%, is controlled by the Israeli army for their camps, for their training fields, for simply controlled by them. And therefore, if you actually see the map, and we have detailed studies of that, the Israelis today live only in the area they lived in during the British Mandate, with a little extension of that, Now, we actually found that 472 village lands of Palestinians who are refugees are still empty, almost empty, except perhaps sometimes a kibbutz, sometimes completely empty. So the question is, Palestinians can return with minimum displacement of the Israelis living on their land. Now, that is talking about demography and geography. But there is no situation in the future in which peace can prevail if Zionism remains. Zionism must be abolished, just like Nazism in Germany is abolished. Germany as people are accepted today because not Nazis. If people want to live in Palestine, they should not live on the assumption that they kill Palestinians and their land. They should live as normal, decent citizens in any country. There are Jews living in Australia. Are they against the law of the country? If those Jews who want to remain living in Palestine as normal citizens, they are welcome. And they should follow the rules, and they should live like everybody else. So from feasibility point of view, it's absolutely possible and easy. We have actually made plans for refugees in every refugee camp in Syria, Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza, how they can go back to their villages and how they can retrieve their property. We have exact data about their property. We know exactly how many settlers in their place, which is not very much, and we can actually measure the distance in 40 kilometers for any refugee. The distance he has to travel from a refugee camp to his home is no more than 45 kilometers. And as I said, in Gaza, they can walk. In Lebanon, they can go from South Lebanon to Galilee in less than half an hour. So the mechanism of return, we have worked out completely. When people go back, their villages, we know how much they own, we know their property, and if there are Israelis who are willing to live in peaceful Palestine as peaceful citizens, they could stay as normal citizens. As I said, they could rent places like they do in London or anywhere, and they don't have to carry a gun and kill the landowner of the place they are taking over. Nobody would accept that. So not only this, I'll add one more. If they do that, they follow a myriad of international law resolutions, which says the refugees are allowed, must go back. There are Resolution 194, calling for the refugees to return, is the longest affirmed resolution in UN history. It is now the level of customary international law, repeated all the time. All what we need, if we have the power, which people like Trump is denying us, is to say United Nations will apply international law. People expelled from their homes should return. We know the mechanism of that. We know they can do. Let me give you another example. In 1993, the United Nations decreed that the Bosnians should return to their homes taken over by the Serbians. And the United Nations carried out a plan for the Bosnians to return home. Our case is much simpler than the Bosnians. In their case, they have no records, they are not sure of how it can be carried out. Now we have exact plans, day by day, how it can be carried out. What is needed, of course, is to lift the hand of the Western colonial powers, which prevents justice to be implemented. And this will come by the resilience of people.
Absolutely. As you always say, Professor Salman, it's not only legal, it's feasible and it's practical. And the only obstacle is, this colonial power, this Zionist ideology that is dominating the scene. And it's interestingly enough that the state of Israel, the admission of the state of Israel into the UN is conditioned upon the implementation of Resolution 194. And so, there's a campaign now going around trying to expel Israel from the UN. I do want to encourage everyone to start putting the questions into the Q&A box, because we're going to start pretty soon. But before we start, I want to go into what took place a couple of days ago. We're hearing suggestions made by current American administration to transfer Palestinians from Gaza into Jordan and Egypt. Trump has recently announced that, the US will own the Gaza Strip. What do you make of that? What do you think Jordan's and Egypt's response will be? And more generally as well, is the realization of Resolution 194 is moving away further and further from being realized after what's happening now?
Well, what I like to see, and what should be done actually, is that Trump is taken cuff-handed to The Hague to be tried immediately for a war crime. He is publicly calling for a war crime. Ethnic cleansing is a war crime. Forced displacement of an occupied country is a war crime. And every single element of what he is saying is a cause for war crime. If Trump was a leader of a small African country, he will be taken under guard to The Hague tomorrow. So this aberration that somebody with such power can call for a crime like that is I wouldn't say unusual in history, but it is really a black spot in the history of people who say we are civilized. No civilized person or country can do that. Now, that is as far as law is concerned. Morally, of course, it is the bottom of evil. The bottom of evil, of course, to expel people from that. If you look at the history, Israel always wanted to reach the Mediterranean, to get rid of the remnants of Palestinians in Gaza. And also now they know that there's oil and gas on the shores of Gaza, so they want to catch that. This is what is in Trump's mind. But they have tried that before. Many times they have tried that before. For example, in 1955, the United Nations under the behest of Israel and the West, said, Gaza is crowded, let us move some refugee camps to Sinai, 1955. And the people there revolted against that. There has been a lot of people who are killed during demonstrations against that. And they said, if we move north to our home to Palestine. We don't move south to another exile. So this failed. And there are many instances in which there have been attempts to do that. For example, the deal of the century, so-called deal of the century of Trump, created by his son-in-law, Kushner, Jared Kushner. He concocted the idea that the people in Gaza should be removed to Beersheba Desert, and they will take the beach property in Gaza. We have maps, I published them in my website, and they wanted to remove the people of, that was 4 or 5 years ago, the people of Gaza to a desert area in Beersheba, which is not inhabited, and it is not passable by anything, even in the British maps of First World War, it's written on that area, unpassable. They would throw them in an area of that magnitude. It did not work. Now they wanted to move this location into Egypt and Jordan. Obviously, Egypt and Jordan, especially Egypt, is vehemently against that for many reasons. But the idea that you actually can move people like cattle is so uncivilized, so disgusting, that it is not worth even mentioning them. As I say, the person who says that should be led handcuffed to The Hague.
Absolutely. I want to do this question that's in the Q&A box. Can you comment on other countries in the region which seem to support Israel? Is this because they're afraid of Israel attacking them in retaliation? Possibly talking about the normalization campaign between Israel and Arab countries that Trump initiated in 2016-17.
The people in the West who support Israel are exemplified by Balfour. Balfour, who issued Balfour Promise, it's only a promise, that when we take over Palestine in 1917, we will allow national home for the Jews in Palestine. Who said that? It was Balfour. Balfour is, using today's terminology, is anti-Semite. In 1905, he issued a decree called Aliens Act in 1905, preventing European Jews from immigrating to England. He does not want them. And he prevented them from stepping on the soil of England. So how come a man like that would issue Balfour Promise? Well, he thought, well, we want to get rid of the Jews, but not in our country. We will send them away to a place where they can be useful for us. And he was thinking of the Suez Canal. And he plainly said, we will let the Jews settle in Palestine to set up a force for us, defending and protecting our interests in the Middle East, especially the Suez Canal. These are his words. So he issued Balfour Declaration with double purpose. Number one, not to allow Jews to come to England, which is his policy. Second, to send them where they can be useful for the British Empire. This simple principle is today applied 10 times more by the United States. They wanted to establish a military base, and Israel is really military base. The people there are just to make things go around, but it's really military base to protect the Western interest in the Middle East, namely oil. But now there is no problem with oil. They get the oil. So now Israel is used as a stick by which the Western powers can hit any Arab ruler who gets out of line. That's why they are rushing now to think of normalization. Normalization means, yes, sir, we accept your mastery, and Israel is your tool, and we will accept Israel. But they all did that at our expense. And that's why Arab rulers now are in their lowest esteem by the Arab people. In 1948, when many Arab rulers failed to do their duty, in the next 10 years, from 1950 to 1960, a lot of them has been assassinated or dethroned in Egypt and Jordan and Syria and so on. And I expect that there will be a reaction from young Arab people today in the next few years against Arab rulers who failed to do their duty or plainly actually assisted Israel and the West in their crimes against Palestinians. Mark my words, there will be something like that in the near future.
Absolutely. I do have a question here about the recent announcement by Trump. Will the objections lodged by the likes of UN, EU, Russia, and China against Trump's ownership claims on Gaza have any real consequences legally?
Could you say the question again, please?
So, well, recently the UN, the EU, Russia, and China lodged some sort of objections to Trump's ownership claims on Gaza. Do you think those objections will have any real consequences?
I see. Well, it's all agreed. Everybody agrees this is against international law, and this is a crime against international law. And will it under the Hague ICC and ICJ, it's a crime to be punishable. Now, whether this punishment will take place or not, it depends, of course, on the balance of power. But all the countries who object to Trump war crimes can do things if they really care about that. They can, for example, control the movement of goods and people in their country. They can prevent the war criminals from landing in their country. They can do a lot of things. And you have a good example of when there is a will, there is a way. For example, take South Africa, very small, very poor country. It took the lead in taking Israel to the Hague, and to the detriment of their interests. And so whether China and other countries take a stand in support of international law is not clear at the moment. The weakest element really is the Arab rulers. If the Arab rulers say to China and Russia, look, if you want to be friends with us, you have to uphold the international law, like they did previously, like Bandung Conference in 1955, when 3/4 of the world showed the Western colonial and Israel that what they are doing are crimes. There have been precedents in the United Nations in 1974, when Palestine was admitted as an observer. But at the moment, I see a stagnant position of those countries who traditionally are against Western colonialism. And I really think that this is partly, to a large extent, I think, that they see the Arab and Muslim countries are so lethargic and so, well, I could use more words than that. So they say, if the people who are directly hit are not moving, why should we?
Absolutely. So the Jewish historian Tony Judt commented some years ago that the two-state solution did not die, but it was killed, and that Israel could choose to become democratic or remain ethnically Jewish, but not both. How should we publicly challenge the often repeated notion of Israeli democracy in the face of an extremely racist reality of the modern Israeli state? I mean, this question also about the one state, two state is really important, because we often hear in the Western media and in the Western political leadership, especially here in Australia, this robotic statement of, we support the Palestinian right to sovereignty and a two-state solution and so on and so forth. So what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, the most charitable of people who want a solution to the Middle East, they say, we want the two-state solution. But nobody told me, what do you mean by the two-state solution? What does that mean? What are the two states? Are they 78% of Palestine to Israel? And the rest is for Palestinians? If so, where is the refugee problem? Where is the right of return? If you put Israel on the map on certain territory, what do you say to the owner of that territory? Where is Israel going to be? Which half Palestine? It's one half, one third, and even if it is 1/10 of Palestine, the land which will be called Israel, it has a landowner who is a refugee. Is he willing to give away his land to Israelis coming from Poland? So I don't buy the idea of two-state solution. It is a time bomb, and it is just, nobody knows what it is, by the way, how it's going to be applied. Does it mean that Palestinians can return to their homes? If so, then I really don't put high regard for the idea of a state or no state. The state's creation is a political act. The right of return is not a political act. It is intrinsic, inalienable right which cannot ever be destroyed. So the answer to these questions is, don't put the cart before the horse. First, implement the right of return, and people return to their homes. Then they will decide together freely what kind of political system they will choose. They want to be communist, they want to be capitalist, I don't care. But that is only after the inalienable right of return is implemented. So the idea of advancing two-state solution is part of a series. I count 75 similar projects from 1948 till now, all kinds of proposals submitted by the West to the Palestinians and to the world. None of them succeeded. They all failed. Why? Because they don't comply with the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. None of them does. None of them. That's why they all failed. They are all a cover for Israeli plans to be implemented under the banner of international law. Why? You have a Roger Plan in 1959. You have Trump, deal of century, and I can count for you at least 55 or 60. All these political recipes in order to admit Israel on our land at our expense, they failed. The answer to real peace is go back to the basics. First, implement inalienable right of Palestinians, right of self-determination, right of return, when people return and live in their homes, I don't care. For me, they call it communist, they call it any kind of country. A political system is the creation of people who live democratically on a piece of land. All right? So don't put the cart before the horse. The horse must come first. And the horse is international law.
Absolutely. And to my understanding, I mean, the Palestinian struggle has never been about land ownership and which gets what. It's about, equal rights, justice, and, the implementation of this humanitarian cause of the right of the people to return to their homes, regardless which piece of land you get eventually.
Yes, yes.
There is a question here about also about Trump. I think tonight it's going to be all about Trump. With Trump beginning the withdrawal of the USA from UN Human Rights Council, what kind of repercussions do you think this is going to have on the other countries within the UN and the future of global human rights in general?
Well, he withdrew from WHO, from Human Rights Council, as you say. He also drew funds from UNRWA. The latter is the worst, because what this means, I really would like to take a minute to explain. What this means is the destruction of Palestinians. It's genocide for Palestinians by other means. Why? Because 194 is the fundamental law for their return. It's made up of 3 elements, 194. First one is paragraph 11, part 1, says that the refugees should return home. Israel, by the way, never said no. Even Shartuk in 1949 said, no, we'll send 30,000 people or more. They never actually said no, but they actually never implemented the right of return. So this became dormant item. Second item was establishing UNRWA for the relief of the refugees to their return. Israel welcomed that completely at the beginning. And why? Because under international law, Israel is responsible for feeding, clothing, and sheltering the people it made refugees. So when the United Nations came forward, the United States came forward and paid the largest budget of UNRWA, they welcomed that. They welcomed that. It's great. And they continue to do that until a few years ago, when they found UNRWA is the only remaining element of Resolution 194. The third element in Resolution 194, establishing United Nations CCP, Conciliation Commission of Palestine, which is created in order to prevent the return of the refugees. And this CCP is still active in the offices of the United Nations. So out of the 3, it tolerated UNRWA because it saved them from responsibility. It actually made the United States pays the highest portion of the budget to save Israel from responsibility. And the other 2 elements of 194 are dormant. Now, if you get rid of UNRWA, you actually get rid of 194 completely, which means you have a sentence that Palestinians will never be allowed or could return home, and therefore the Palestine 20,500 square kilometers of refugee land should go scot-free to the Jews who came from Romania. And therefore, putting a strong lid on the whole question of Palestinian rights will mean that 194 is no more operable. And that's what they are trying to do. Killing UNRWA is killing the only living member of Resolution 194.
Absolutely. And for someone who's asking what Resolution 194 is, it's a UN resolution implemented immediately after 1948. As I recall, Professor Salman, correct me if I'm wrong, that it demands the implementation of the right of return of those Palestinian refugees who were ethnically cleansed during the
Yes.
Nakba.
Yes, they have the right to return, they have the right for compensation, and they have the right to be provided with relief until this happens. And UNCCP is entrusted with the mechanism of how they could return.
Absolutely. There's a question here, Professor Salman, wanting to expand a little bit more about your own lived experience. And it goes like this: would be interested to hear more of Professor Salman Abu Sitta's story, especially his memories of his childhood as a 10-year-old affected by the Nakba?
Yes, allow me to put a little ad here. I have described all this in my memoir called Mapping My Return. Mapping My Return. It's in English, and it appears also in Italian. We hope it will be in Spanish and Arabic soon. Very simply, I repeat the story. At the age of 10, we were attacked by 24 armored vehicles of the Haganah. They destroyed the school which my father built in 1920. They burnt our homes completely, and they killed anybody they found in sight. They created death and destruction in Al Ma'in, my home. As a child, I wondered then and until now, who are these people? Where do they come from? Why do they hate us? Why do they destroy our life? We have not seen them before. We have not heard about them before. We have done them no wrong. And it became my life mission to know their names, their jobs, where they come from, their pictures. I found their pictures. And one of them is German, the other one is South African, and the other one is Romanian. And I traced their trajectory and where they come from to understand why they came to commit a crime against people they have never seen before. Now, this continued on, of course, for the following years. And I'm glad to report to you today that I am now in a contract with the University of London to recreate that situation geographically in detail. We have collected aerial photos and maps and all that. And with their help, they have something called architecture, investigative architecture, that we are going to show how they attacked us and how they erased our landscape. And we have in Al Ma'in 7 roads converging on us. Why did they wipe them out? And they created new roads. How they built the kibbutz, where they built the kibbutz, where? Of course, it's always on a high point and near water and so on. How the kibbutz were built, it was military structure with fences and so on. When they built the kibbutz, they wanted people for the kibbutz. So they got people from the port and they said, now you go to this kibbutz, you go to this kibbutz. They filled the kibbutz not with people who naturally live there, but people who were recruited to fill that space. And then we trace this one by one. So I'm now creating very soon detail of how our landscape was before 1948 and how it was systematically destroyed by Israel step by step. And the third part of this equation is return plan. And I'm planning how we could return. Our people, my family know where they live, where their ownership. We are going to build a university there instead of a small school. We are going to build a big hospital instead of a clinic. We are going to use 7 roads leading to Khan Yunis, Gaza, Beersheba, Jerusalem, and so on. So we are creating, in a competition with young Palestinian architects, the town plan for the future Al-Main. By the way, let me say, if people did not know, Palestine Land Society started 9 years ago, competition among Palestinians for the reconstruction of destroyed Palestinian villages. We give them data about each village, and they design it for today's population, 10 times more, and modern methods. So far, we have 270 Palestinian young architects have participated. We completed the redesign of 60 villages. We have 12 universities joining us. Every year in September, British jury decide the winners for that year. And in our website, Palestine Land Society, now every week we give a sample of the redesign of a village of Palestinian. So not only the type of return is feasible, we have plans how to implement it step by step.
Absolutely, and I really encourage everyone to check their website, Palestine Land Society. It's fascinating work that they've done so far. At the end, Professor Salman, last week we had Professor Hayim Rashid Zabna on, and he's a close friend and colleague of yours in the struggle, and he made the suggestion that historians have the ability to kind of study the patterns of the past and the present and try to foresee what's ahead. I mean, what is awaiting Gaza and Palestine after this, ceasefire? I mean, what was the impact of the genocide on the international arena, like on Israel as well, on the perception of Palestine in the eyes of the world? What lies ahead?
Yes, Hayim is an honorable man, very honorable man. I spoke to him recently in London, and his eyes were full of tears when he speaks about Palestine. Very honorable man. This is an example, a sample actually, of the Jew who has conscience and who refused to be recruited to commit crimes. What the future holds, we have a very good indication of that. If Palestine and Palestinian people would be destroyed, they would have been destroyed in the first year, maybe first month of 1948. Take an example of any situation in history in which people vanished, especially in modern times. Any situation which lasts more than a month or a year or 2 years is probably have elements of life in it. But the Israeli Zionist project in Palestine never have a moment of peace, never have a moment of peace, never have an acceptance. And now the lack of acceptance is spreading all over the world, even in the territory which created it in the first place, namely Western countries, but mostly, of course, among people, not governments. So Einstein once said, if you try an experiment and it failed, and you try another time and it failed, it is stupid to think that repeating the experiment would succeed again because you tried it. So Israel now lives only by the brute uh, of force. And as you know, the saying, live by the sword, die by the sword. So it will never be accepted because it's against the grain of any human element of, you cannot live on killing of people and taking their homes. You cannot do that. So the element of end of Zionism lies in its policies, which have not succeeded. And all I am sorry about is that we Palestinians have even to suffer even one more day, one more hour, until the truth comes clear and that the world knows that Palestinians belong to Palestine and our home is in Palestine. We'll never give it up. And if you, by the way, if you give up Palestine, what reason have you not to give up on Lebanon? You can say destroy Lebanon as well. You can say destroy Syria, destroy Egypt. What is the difference between destroying Palestine and destroying any other country? If you justify that in Palestine, you are actually issuing life of death sentence on Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. If you justify that in one place, why not justify it? Palestine is not a bald spot in the Middle East where you can do what you like. If you have freedom to kill people in the Arab world, you might just as well allow them to kill people in any other Arab world. So this is against the grain of anything in normal human history.
Absolutely, and that's why it's important for us to keep our campaigning, to keep our pressure in order to achieve accountability for the planned ethnic cleansing, for the genocide, because if we allow it to happen without accountability in Gaza, then we will allow it to happen elsewhere in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm glad this is a nice way to conclude. So it's a duty for anyone who's listening to us, not only you talk about historical case which vanished. If you allow it, it will happen tomorrow to you or to somebody you know. So you should not allow it.
Absolutely. Another note, I really want to encourage everyone not to lose hope and keep pushing ahead with supporting the Palestinian movement. Although, you know, with Trump announcements, things can get gloomy, but we should draw inspirations from the Palestinian resilience and the resistance in Gaza, and we will win. It's a long marathon, but we will win.
I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. By the way, Ahmed, if your friends like to get maps of Palestine, which you introduced, we'll be glad to send you 10, 20, 30, if you like. If so, send me postal address and we will send it to you.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much for that generosity, Professor Salman. We'll definitely be in contact, and I encourage everyone who's wanting to get one of those posters, please reach out, and then I'll direct you to Professor Salman. Professor Salman, it's been a delight. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking to our friends in Australia who care about justice in Palestine. Thank you very much.
It's all our pleasure. And I also want to extend my thanks to everyone who's joined us today. It's been a fantastic night, and apologies I didn't address all the questions for the lack of time. I also want to make an announcement that this video is recorded, and I will send the video recording to everyone after the webinar. I also want to confirm that this event, the registration was for free for people to attend, but people also donated generously, and all the donations will go to Gazan families that I am in touch with in Gaza that are currently recovering or trying to recover. So thanks for those people who donated generously. And again, thank you so much, Professor Salman. Hopefully we'll have you again in person at some point in Sydney.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.